As you watching the news today, something extraordinary happened, and the mainstream media is desperately trying to bury it. It's not a coincidence. It's not an accident. It's what happens when a system that's worked for decades finally meets someone who won't play the game for weeks. For weeks, they create an impossible scenario. They tell you there are only two options, and both of them involve you losing. Either the government shuts down and everything collapses, or they approve a budget so bloated it drains billions of your dollars into projects no one asked for and no one wants. That's the machine. It's always been this way. But yesterday, Trump did something the old guard can't process. He changed the entire chessboard before Schumer could make his move. And when you understand exactly how that happened, you'll realize the pattern emerging changes everything about this country's political future. But wait, there's more. The Democrats had a flawless budget trap. They built it for months. Tens of billions in projects no one can reject without looking irresponsible. Infrastructure here, defense there, social programs somewhere else. All wrapped together in one ball that you either approve, everything or nothing works. Schumer was sure he'd win. He had to win. The system always won. But Trump didn't play their game. He didn't accept the two options they offered. Instead, he offered a third, a lean budget, no billions in projects that have funded the Democratic machine for decades. No pork that keeps the establishment in power, simple, clean, efficient. And here's where it gets interesting. When that option was put on the table, something shifted in the entire dynamic because suddenly the Democrats no longer controlled the narrative. They had to choose either accept a budget that actually protects taxpayer money or reject it and appear to be protecting the very waste they claim to fight. See the move? He didn't win the battle on their turf. He created new turf where his was the only defensible position. Now, you might think it's just a budget cut, just another day in Washington, but it's not. When you really dig into the numbers, when you look at the pattern, it becomes obvious that something fundamental is changing. The 90 billion that disappeared represents much more than money. It represents influence, power, control. Think about it. For decades, those billions were the glue that kept the Democratic machine running. They funded organizations. They created beneficiaries. They built loyalty, and suddenly it's gone. Schumer lost the battle. He thought he had won. Worse. Much worse. He just lost influence. And when you lose influence in Washington, everyone sees it. Everyone understands that you've weakened. The question now is the one no one is asking. If Trump could do this to Schumer, what comes next? Because one thing is becoming clearer every day. The old guard can't stop him. And every move he makes that more obvious. Every victory empowers his allies. Every Schumer defeat weakens the Democrats. But wait, because what's really happening is much bigger than a budget cut. What's happening is a reconfiguration of power. In Washington, this isn't an isolated battle. It's a pattern. It's the first piece of a chess game that only gets more complicated from here. You see, the Washington system was built to keep people out of power, to keep the same actors, Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. The machine keeps running. The same consultants get paid. The same beneficiary funds receive money. The same media narrative is built. But here's what no one expected, that someone would actually try to destroy that system, not just criticize it, not just make promises, but actually go in and start taking the pieces apart one by one. When you look at what happened this week, with the correct perspective, it's not just about the budget, it's about who controls the narrative. and it's about who can force the other to play by their rules. And suddenly the Democrats are playing by Trump's rules. They're responding to him. They're on the defensive. This changes everything, because in politics, when you're on the defensive, you're losing. You stop controlling the agenda. You stop dictating the terms. And once you start losing that narrative war, it gets harder and harder to recover. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so what? It's just politics. It doesn't affect my life. But here's where you're wrong, and I'm going to show you why. Every one of those billions that was cut either comes from when the government spends $90 billion on projects that don't work, on programs that solve nothing, on infrastructure that becomes obsolete. Who pays? You do. You and every American who works and pays taxes. So yes, $90 billion budget cut is just about politics, but it's also about you having more money in your account. It's about you not having to work 3 more months a year just to fund programs that enrich consultants in Washington. It's about freedom, because when the government stops draining your resources on waste, you have more freedom. Freedom to build something. Freedom to create. Freedom to choose how you want to live your life. But wait, because here's where it gets much more interesting, because this victory didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't just Trump. There was something bigger happening behind the scenes. And when you understand what it was, you'll realize we're in the middle of something historic. In recent months, there's been a shift in alignments in Washington, new voices gaining influence, new perspectives being heard at the core of power, people who think differently, people who understand technology, efficiency, how to actually make things work, not through bureaucracy and committees, but through clear thinking and direct action. And these voices amplified a very simple message. Enough waste, enough projects that don't work, enough money being drained into administrative black holes. And when you amplify that message to millions of Americans, when you put it in front of cameras and microphones, when you make it impossible to ignore, something happens. The political pressure that builds becomes unbearable. The Democrats can't resist, because how do you defend a budget cut if you're supposedly the party of fiscal efficiency? How do you defend billions in pork if you're the party that says it wants to protect people's money? You can't. It's a trap, and they fell right into it. But here's the pattern no one is really discussing. This isn't an accident. This is part of something much bigger. And the more you look back, the more you connect the dots, the more obvious it becomes. There's a movement happening, an anti-establishment movement, a movement that says the old way of doing politics no longer works, and with every victory, this movement achieves. Every time they manage to do something the establishment said was impossible, more people wake up. More people see that maybe the system isn't as invincible as it seemed. You know what the establishment's real fear is? It's not a person, it's not a party. It's the possibility that millions of people will discover that their power was illusory, that the system only works because people believe it works. And when people stop believing, when they start demanding change, when they realize it's possible to do things differently, everything changes. This is what's happening now. And that's why the mainstream media is desperately trying to bury this story. Because if millions of people realize that budget cuts are possible, that waste isn't inevitable, that you can confront Schumer and win, then what else is possible? The question gets bigger, much bigger, because you see, when you can cut $90 billion from a budget that was supposed to be untouchable, you prove a principle. The principle that there's no such thing as inevitable in politics. The principle that if you have clarity, if you have courage, if you're willing to confront the status quo, you can win. And once that principle is established, everything else is in play. The next question is obvious. If we can cut $90 billion here, why can't we reorganize Social Security? Why can't we reform healthcare? Why can't we destroy the bureaucracy that makes everything inefficient? These are the questions the establishment doesn't want you to ask. Because once you start asking those questions, once you see that change is possible, you can't go back. So here's what's really at stake this week. It's not just a budget cut. It's a proof of concept. It's a demonstration that the old system can be confronted. It's the beginning of something that will unfold over the next few years. Think about the next budget battle, the next confrontations, because now the dynamic has changed. Now there's precedent. Now there's proof that you can win against Schumer, against the Democratic machine, against the establishment. And that's terrifying for them because they built everything based on the assumption that they would always win, that they had control, that you had no option, and suddenly there's an option, there's an alternative, there's victory. Now, you might be wondering if I'm being overly optimistic, if I'm seeing patterns that don't exist, but let me show you something. Let me connect the dots. So you see this isn't an accident. 3 years ago, when Biden won, the establishment said it was safe, that the system would stabilize, that old politics would return. But people kept complaining. The cost of living kept rising. The economy didn't stabilize, and frustration grew. Then there were the midterms, and what everyone predicted didn't happen, and the red wave that was expected didn't arrive. But not because the system was working. It was because people still believed in traditional politics. They still expected things to change in a normal way. But something shifted after that patience waned. The willingness to confront the status quo increased. And when you have political momentum combined with leadership that's actually willing to confront the system, you have an opportunity for transformation. And that's exactly what we're seeing. It's no coincidence that this budget victory happens now. It's the result of months of building political pressure, of clear communication, of refusing to accept the old game. But here's the thing that really makes me think we're at the beginning of something big. What's happening isn't isolated to the United States. You see similar patterns all over the world. Leaders confronting the establishment, movements, rejecting old politics, populations demanding change. This isn't a global coincidence. It's a genuine pattern. And when you see the same pattern happening in multiple countries, multiple cultures, multiple political systems, it's not an accident. It's that the old model is collapsing because it no longer works. And the question no one is asking is the right one. How long can the establishment resist? Because every victory of the anti-establishment movement weakens the status quo. Every budget cut proves that change is possible. Every time Schumer loses, the next battle gets easier. There's an inflection point, a point where change goes from distant hope to inevitability. And when you analyze the numbers, when you look at the patterns, when you connect the dots, it becomes clear that we're close to that point. Maybe we've already passed it. Because, you see, once people see that change is possible, once they realize that the power they ceded was power that could be reclaimed, everything changes. You can no longer convince them they're powerless. You can no longer sell the illusion that the system is inevitable, and that's what scares the establishment. It's not Trump as a person, it's Trump as a symbol, as proof that it's possible to do things differently. So what comes next? Because that question is, what really matters, this budget victory is just the beginning. What comes next is much more fundamental. If we can cut $90 billion, the next question is about structural reforms, about rethinking how the government works, about eliminating agencies that serve no purpose, about reorganizing the state machine so that it serves the people and not its own interests. This is a much bigger war than a budget cut. It's a war about the future of American government. It's about who the government serves, you or the establishment. And when you focus that war clearly, when you frame it so that every person understands that their money, their future is at stake, then the entire political dynamic changes because everyone has a stake in this war. Everyone is affected. Now, the real question, why am I telling you all this? Why am I connecting these dots? Because when you understand the pattern, when you see the structure behind the events, you can anticipate what comes next. And what comes next is critical because the establishment won't give up easily. Every victory you achieve against them will result in increasingly tougher resistance. They'll fight harder and harder because they have more to lose. So there will be worse battles, more intense confrontations, moments where it will seem like all is lost. But here's what needs to be clear in your mind. Every time they resist and lose, they get weaker. Every time they try to maintain the old system and fail, the system becomes more broken. And you, as an observer, as a person who understands the patterns, you'll see this clearly. While most people are confused by the contradictory headlines, you'll know exactly what's happening. You'll see the movement, you'll understand the dynamic, and even more importantly, you'll know that this doesn't end with this budget cut. It doesn't end here. It ends when the entire system is reformed and when the government finally serves the people and not its own interests, when efficiency and freedom once again become the guiding principles of how things work. This will take time. It will be messy at times, but the pattern is established now. And patterns, once they start, are practically impossible to stop. So the real question you need to ask yourself is simple. Do you understand the pattern? Do you see what's really happening? Because when you see it, when you truly comprehend it, you can no longer act like you don't, because you know that something historic is happening, and it will have enormous consequences for how everything works from now on. Because you see this victory today, this 90 billion cut, this defeat for Schumer, this is just the first domino to fall, and the rest of the structure is much more unstable now. The question is, which will be the next bastion of the establishment to collapse? Which will be the next victory that proves real change is possible? And here's what makes me remain optimistic through all this. Because when you have political momentum, when you have leadership that's actually willing to confront the status quo, when you have a population that's tired of the old way, you have the ingredients for real transformation. Not for cosmetic change, not for small adjustments, for genuine transformation of how things work. And that transformation will happen. It will take longer than anyone wants. It will be messier than anyone expects, but the movement is in motion now. And when you put history in motion, when you start confronting entrenched systems, when you start making people believe that change is possible, you open the door, and once that door is open, you can't close it again. So here's where we are. You understand now why this budget cut matters, why Schumer's defeat means more than money, why this emerging pattern is crucial for the future of this country. The question that remains open, the question that will determine everything that comes next, is whether people will stay awake, if they will continue seeing the pattern, if they will continue demanding change until the system truly transforms, because this week's victory doesn't end anything. It starts everything.